meditations and spiritual life. And we have the distinct pleasure to have Dent Gitchell be our presenting instructor teacher tonight. Dent is a associate professor of rehabilitation counseling at the University of Arkansas of Little Rock. He is the author of a wonderful introduction to meditation and spiritual life called The Power of Purpose that is coming out very shortly. And he also is one of the first persons certified as a compassion cultivation trainer through the Center for Compassion and Altruism Research and Education at Stanford University. And we've had the pleasure of having Dent teach us in the past. And it's always been a very, very wonderful and uplifting experience. So without any further ado, I do hand over the baton to Dent Gitchell. Welcome, welcome.
All right, thank you. I feel like, as someone who feels like he spent half of his life on Zoom lately, first thing I need to say is, can you hear me? All right, so let's begin with our Four Boundless States, Four Boundless Thoughts prayer, and Shanti Deva verses. And hello for people I've never met. I'm Dent Gitchell, as Harvey indicated. And then straight after this, I will lead us in straight directly into a guided meditation. May all beings always have happiness
and its causes. May all beings always
be free of pain and its causes. May all beings always be pain-free and live happily. May no beings ever cling to those near nor spurn those far. For as long as space abides, as long as the world remains, just so long may I be there, resolving all beings' pain. So just allow your body and mind to settle. First, perhaps bringing your attention to your seat, the places of contact between your seat, your feet, and the floor, ground beneath you. Just feel into this contact, the support beneath you. Really feel into a sense of groundedness, rootedness, support. And as much as possible, let go and allow yourself to be supported. And from this place of groundedness, enhance the upright position of your body. Allow your spine to be straight, all the way from your sits bones to the crown of your head. You might gently move from side to side and forward to back, and just find that place of optimal balance, upright and supported by the ground beneath you and supported by your spine, your skeletal system. And from this place of uprightedness, allow your body as much as possible to just relax. Now it can be good to bring places of tension, a little bit of attention, and allow those places to relax a bit more. Bring your attention to your head. And notice any places of muscular tension in your head, and allow those places to relax. Crown of your head, allow it to relax. Muscles around your eyes and the forehead. Sometimes we carry a lot of tension here. Allow these muscles to relax. Your cheeks, your jaw. Allow the entire head to relax. Your neck, your shoulders. Down through your arms, your upper torso. Your abdomen, your belly. Your buttocks region. All the way down your body through your legs to your feet. Now very gently bring your attention to the sensations of your breathing. Whatever place is most prominent to you, could be the nostrils, the belly, or perhaps just the rhythm of the breathing throughout your entire body. Just very gently allow your attention to be with these sensations as you breathe in and as you breathe out. Just allowing the breath to be normal, the natural rhythm of the breath, as Thupten Jinpa calls it. Let's spend several minutes just with the breathing and the sensations of the breath. And in this simple practice, the whole practice is really to be with the breathing, and then to gently come back to this process when our minds wander, which for many of us is quite often. Sharon Salzberg sometimes says the real practice is not when we're doing the practice, but when we're not. So when our minds stray, can we just be gentle and recognize that our minds have wandered, and then gently bring it back? Now we're going to switch gears a little bit. I invite you to bring to mind a compassionate image. This is something that for you is an embodiment of compassion, love, wisdom. It could be a teacher, public figure, a historical figure, a religious icon, an object from nature, such as a tree or a waterfall. But just to bring to mind in your imagination a compassionate image. And imagine that it's there in front of you. You're in the presence of this compassionate image. Just allow yourself to be aware of this image. And to gently notice what it's like for you as you are aware of this image. And recognize that this image is emanating pure compassion. And recognize that this compassion is directed toward you. Unconditional love and compassion. And as much as you can, open yourself to receive this compassion. There's no strings attached in this love, this compassion. It's pure. It only has your best interest in mind. Just allow yourself to bathe in this compassion. Receive it as much as you can. Notice what it's like to receive this compassion. Unconditional acceptance. Now allow this compassion to awaken within you, your compassion. This compassion that you receive is also the compassion you have within you. Allow your breath to be infused with compassion as you breathe in and breathe out now. Breathing in compassion. Breathing out compassion. Breathing in compassion. And breathing out compassion. You may drop the imagery of the image, but just stay with this process of breathing in and out compassion. As if your compassion is part of the breath itself. Now, from this place of compassion, give yourself messages of compassion. If you're willing, recite in your mind for yourself. May I be free of suffering. May I be free of fear. May I have happiness, peace, and joy. May I be free of suffering. May I be free of fear. May I have happiness, peace, and joy. Now return to your breath and your breathing for a few cycles and just breathe. Be aware of how you're feeling right now. As you breathe, now I ask you or invite you to very gently maybe like dipping your toe in a cold stream before you test the temperature, before you jump in. Very gently bring to mind something that's difficult for you in your life right now. Bring this to mind, not in a way that causes distress, but in a way that you can hold it very gently. Just bring this to mind, whatever it is that's difficult for you in your life right now, or something that's difficult. You don't have to go for the most difficult. Just hold this in mind for a moment and breathe into it and get a sense for this difficulty. What is it? How is it difficult for me? How does this difficulty affect me? And if I drop the storylines, what does it feel like? What is the emotional core of this difficulty? And once again, give yourself messages of self-compassion. May I be free of this difficulty. May I have happiness and peace. May I be free of this difficulty. May I have happiness and peace. Now I invite you to consider that this difficulty does not isolate you from others. Is not a barrier to having connection with others. I invite you to consider that this difficulty is a shared human difficulty. And consider that right now, at this moment, there are countless other people, sentient beings, that can resonate with this difficulty, that experience something similar as yourself. Recognize this difficulty, this suffering, as a shared human experience. Now send messages of compassion both to yourself and to others that also share in this difficulty. Reciting silently in your mind, may each of us be free of suffering. May each of us have happiness, peace, and joy. May each of us be free of suffering. May each of us have happiness and peace and joy. And imagine that your compassion is in some ways alleviating the suffering that you share with others. In some ways, bringing comfort, relief. And now gently just return to your breathing. Just being aware of your body as it breathes in and out. And for the last moments of this meditation, just very gently observe any effects of this short practice on your mind, on your body, on your emotions. And I will gently ring a bell. We can return to the space, our shared space. Well, the topic tonight is working with difficult emotions through the lens of compassion. And before we jump in, I would like to invite anyone to provide a little feedback or observations about how this practice was for you. And multitasking isn't my best skill, so I have to figure out how to notice if anyone has a question.
You'll have to use the raise hand feature in your participants menu because I'm not allowing anyone to unmute themselves.
Okay, thank you. So I invite any reflections or feedback about this practice. How was it for you? As one of my teachers says, every experience is authentic. So anyone who's willing to share their authentic experience would be wonderful. I see a hand. Check.
You have to tell her. She knows. She knows. I'm here. Hey, I guess I'm live.
Hi, yes, I can hear you at least.
Hey. I really enjoyed that meditation. And I got like a little I got like a little allergy attack, which I don't usually get right as we were starting. So I was totally like thrown off. But as you continue to lead us through and you led us to compassion, it started to ground me, first of all. And then when you said you could choose a figure, I chose Adson Rinpoche as my compassion, which pretty much just like pours all out compassion. And then when you said to go to something difficult, last night I woke up last night and I had something I was that I'm potentially going to deal with that could be cause stress. So with the compassion that we had already created, that when I went to that, it didn't have the same emotional, I want to say resonance, but in a negative way. It was more even keeled. It was more like, okay, this is not as bad as the story that I was telling myself last night in my head. Because, you know, once I get into anxiety about something, the stories will repeat and repeat and repeat and repeat and repeat. And I have to do something like meditate or mantra or something to stop the storyline. So it was really nice to see that through the meditation, that when I came to that place, I arrived at a much more, with much more equanimity about the situation.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Thanks for the feedback.
Yeah.
So there's this difficulty that might, quote unquote, typically or habitually result in anxiety. In this particular instance, you use the word even keel, maybe, and equanimity.
Mm-hmm.
Could you maybe expound on that a little bit, like what that felt like and maybe how that relates to being less anxious or something like that?
Yeah, so in terms of feeling, when I go into, if I go into anxiety, I get like, you know, the chemical reactions go into my body and I start to feel it, and it makes it almost feel like it's real. It's like I'm telling a story, like instead of saying, you know, there's a possibility that everything could work itself out and everything could be fine. But when I get that chemical reaction that goes into my body, it feeds this wheel of a story of like the bad situation. And then, so I feel it in my body, I feel it in my mind. And then it's like almost like a boxing match to try to stop it, to stop that cycle, which I kind of had to do last night. And it worked eventually, because I do have a lot of good tools. But today when going there, I was because of the way you led us through it, I was already, so that in my body, I didn't have the chemical reactions, didn't go into my body. You know, the storyline wasn't going into my mind. So, you know, and so that's why I felt, you know, when thinking of it, I felt more like grounded about it. And it was really because of the whole way that you led us through, that I was able to be in that place, which obviously is like the place you want to be, if you can be, about anything that could be challenging, you know. So it was nice to be in that place, and it was nice to feel like it didn't have the emotional charge on me that it did last night.
Right. All right. Well, thanks so much.
Thank you.
We've got time for another observation if anyone else would be willing to share. And it can be anything. It could be barriers, obstacles that you had, challenges, or just anything that emerged for you during this practice.
We have Phyllis Moses with her hand raised.
So I feel like emotions are such a big topic and a difficult thing. I feel like I've actually gone much more to Western modalities, to try to sort through the emotional afflictions or obscurations I've had, although I've been a very long-term Vajrayana practitioner. I want to like blend both sides a little more in a sense. So it's just interesting to me. I didn't connect with my feelings for a good part of my adult life, but it seems like the practices root them out and come up more. So that's why I'm just curious about what else will be shared. But for me, it's kind of hard. It's like this big thing. Oh, what am I really feeling about this?
Yeah, well, thank you. How about in this particular practice, in terms of feelings, emotions, what came up for you, and how did you react to what came up?
Well, I'm able to I brought more compassionate awareness to it. I feel that it helped me to settle, but I didn't feel that it led more to resolution other than, okay, just noticing, being aware, bringing, so there's that sense of feeling more compassionate for myself, like, yeah, this is kind of big. I've been working with this for a while.
Yeah, okay, great. Thank you. Thank you very much for your feedback. All right, so that's a good segue for jumping into our topic. Again, multitasking drives me insane. So I think we're good to go. No more hands up as far as I can tell. So again, the topic I'm going to introduce or discuss is working with difficult emotions through the lens of compassion. And I almost said negative emotions, and it was definitely beat into my mind, it's not negative emotions, it's not negative emotions, it's difficult emotions. And I can't speak for anyone else, but I can speak for myself. During this time of multiple pandemics, the virus, emerging awareness of racism, greed, what have you, there's multiple what I call pandemics going on, what many people call pandemics. And I've been aware in my own life of very strong emotions, almost one after another, and very divergent emotions, just overwhelming, sometimes feelings of gratitude, followed by just fear that's almost down to the core of my bones, anger, outrage. It's just literally what I call in my book, I call this the onslaught of modernity. And right now the onslaught is just like, it's like a full force onslaught. So then a question to me is like, how do I work with these emotions just personally? And I've noticed His Holiness the Dalai Lama over the years. He obviously is a traditional Tibetan teacher, and he has many teachings on traditional Tibetan topics. He has a whole line of teachings on secular ethics. And it seems like increasingly over the past 5 to 10 years, he's really been emphasizing it. Definitely in talks to Western audiences, emotional balance, emotional awareness, emotional literacy. And that's been sort of on my radar for a while. And I've sort of like always considered that, well, he does his high teachings and then he does his initiatives involved with the Tibetan people. And then I've always in my mind, kind of my biased mind, consider these kind of lower teachings, these teachings on ethics and emotions. And just in terms of my own life and what I see around me, I feel like we have to be able to work with difficult emotions, or I can't function if I can't figure out a way to work with these difficult emotions that are literally just kind of swirling around me all the time. And I'll be in this wonderful place of peace, and then just suddenly, for instance, I'm just overwhelmed with fear. Fear for myself, for the world, for my children, etc. So I've been sort of rethinking this, like, why do we want to work with emotions, and how does that relate to like a Buddhist path or a spiritual path? And I'm reflecting back on like the first time I encountered Buddhism. The first thing that just grabbed my attention was the Four Noble Truths, pardon me, not tooths, even though my son's lost 4 teeth the past few weeks. And I remember in this undergraduate class just reading the Four Noble Truths, and was like, oh my gosh, like somebody is telling me the truth. There's no spin here. This is what it's all about. And there's this, basically there's this idea that there's suffering and that there's a cause for the suffering, but there's also a path out of it. And for me, it seems like right now the path is largely, or involves a lot of working with these emotions that are very strong, often very reactive. And for instance, and I'll talk a little bit more, like, what is a reactive emotion? It's emotion that, in acceptance and commitment therapy, they use the term fused. A reactive emotion is an emotion that I become totally fused with, and I sort of lose my perspective. It's like I'm going along for the ride, so to speak, with the emotion, and the emotion's in the driver's seat, and I've lost my control, and it feels icky, and it typically doesn't have a good outcome, either for myself or for others around me. And a lot of the path to me is about, what do I do with suffering? My own suffering and other people's suffering. And when I try to be with the suffering, what happens is these emotions pop up. And they're like obstacles to the compassion. So I'm not sure I framed this really well, but for me, to develop compassion, both for myself and for others, and to attempt to alleviate the suffering, I have to have a way of working with emotions, because the emotions, a strong emotion, not emotions in general perhaps, but a strong reactive emotion either overwhelms me or I can't deal with it at all, so I push it away. It's like a suppression or being overcome with it. And to me, that's like the two sort of habitual ways that we, meaning just normal dualistic minded people, deal with suffering. It's either to be overwhelmed by it or to push it away. And it seems like neither of those are really that productive. And ideally, I think it would be wonderful if I could sort of get in the zone or the mindfulness or the view and just let the emotions come and go and stick true to my values and my motivation and do what's the right thing to do. But that's quite difficult. But with a place of compassion, I think that that's more doable, or it feels more doable. And so I think of compassion as not only like compassion for someone or for myself, but as a state of mind, a way of experiencing the world, a way of being with the world, including myself. And so what I'm going to emphasize here is a way of being, strategies for being with difficult emotions from a place of compassion, compassionate presence, which is what at least part of that meditation was intending to do. the sort of standard or semi-standard definition of compassion from a Buddhist perspective would be something like the wish to alleviate suffering. Or from a Mahayana perspective, maybe not only the wish to alleviate it, but some sort of resolve to alleviate it. Thupten Jinpa talks about three components of compassion. And the first is awareness. So what awareness of what? It's awareness of suffering, difficulty. But it's not only awareness, it's also being moved in a particular way from that awareness. For instance, if someone is in a place of suffering, a state of suffering, and my response is pity, that's a little different movement of the heart than the movement of compassion. Or if someone who's my quote unquote enemy is suffering, and I get a little tinge of enjoyment from it, perhaps some satisfaction, perhaps in my mind, aha, they deserve it, that's definitely not compassion. So awareness isn't enough. There's this movement of the heart towards the suffering with the desire to alleviate it, which leads to the wish to alleviate it from a place of compassion. One of my teachers, Margaret Cullen, she has her own definition of compassion, which I love it. She says, compassion is when love meets suffering. So what would it be like, I wonder, to approach our own emotions, our own sort of difficult habitual reactions to the world, our difficult emotions? What would it be like to experience those from a place of compassion, from a place of appreciation, from a place of open-heartedness, rather than these extremes, which I definitely can see in myself, of either being totally overcome with it, maybe it's fear, maybe it's grief, or just like, I don't want to feel that at all, and pushing it to the side, stuffing it under. So I feel like compassion is the middle ground, being able to be with it. My own informal definition of compassion is the ability to be with difficulty in a caring and sustained way. So what would it be like if I could be with my own experiences, particularly my own difficult experiences, from a place of compassion, from a state of compassion? Sometimes when I'm talking about compassion, like in a public setting, I say, often I start off with saying it's not a feeling. One, just to sort of frame it that way. And two, because I see it as a sort of a multidimensional response to what's going on in the world. And I compare it sometimes to depression. Not that they're in any way the same in terms of the experience, but if someone is being diagnosed for depression, it's not like, oh, do you feel depressed? I mean, there's a whole lot of different feelings involved with it in a state of depression. I'm thinking like a clinical state now. And then there's the thought processes. Maybe I'm thinking hopeless thoughts or what have you. There's thought processes affiliated with. There's behavioral aspects of depression, lack of motivation, etc. And it manifests in this entire sort of worldview or perspective on reality. It's the whole person. The whole person is depressed. It's not simply a feeling. And I think of compassion this way. Ideally, I think a compassionate presence is a way of being with what is there and not running from it, and responding from a place of service, care, concern. So how does this work with emotions? How can we be with emotions, difficult emotions? I'm not going to give you any sort of theories of emotions. I'm going to talk more about, I'm really targeting in on strategies for working with emotions. But first, just a short few bits about what an emotion is, or difficult emotions, how they manifest, how we might experience them. There's this, I call it emotional knowing, and this is sort of my own terms. These aren't technical terms. It seems like at the core, emotional knowing is about sort of appraising our relationships. Richard Lazarus, I'm not like an emotion scholar. Some people say that he was like the first person to really seriously bring compassion into the study and sort of mainstream psychology. In a 1991 book, Emotion and Adaptation, he writes, the quality of an emotion reveals something about the ongoing relationship between the person and environment. So from that perspective, I'm conceiving as emotion as something that emerges in terms of our relationship with the environment. And here I'm considering our difficult emotions as something we can have a relationship with. And in his model, each emotion has what he calls a core relational theme. And this fits in very well with the Buddhist definition. His core relational theme he identifies with compassion as being moved by another's suffering and wanting to help. And another way I think of that sometimes is the purpose of the emotion. And I think sometimes of evolutionary history, and I imagine myself as a cave person walking around the savannah, doing whatever I'm doing as a cave person. And my sort of emotional knowing is in tune with my environment. I'm taking in the world. And part of the appraisal system is locating things that matter, that are important. And so I'm going through the savannah or wherever I'm wandering around as my cave person, and I see a tiger, one of those extinct kind with the really long teeth. And it's looking at me like it's hungry for breakfast. And so my appraisal process tells me instantly, all right, this is something important. And that sense of importance is going to trigger an emotional reaction, which in this sense would be fear, probably. And so once the emotional reaction occurs, then according to Paul Ekman, who's a sort of contemporary emotion person, well-known emotion person, once I'm sort of in the grips of an emotion, what happens is there's something called a refractory period, which is a fancy way of saying that I'm fused with the emotion. I'm under the grips of the emotion. And interestingly, when I'm in the refractory period, I like to call these lenses. I'm wearing the lenses of fear. So I'm seeing the world through my fear goggles, so to speak. And what happens is I'm not seeing the world objectively anymore, or less objectively than I was. And so I'm looking for things in the environment that validate this fear. Basically, it's like a self-fulfilling process. I'm fearful, so then I see things that validate that fear. So there's an extreme form of bias going on. So I'm not seeing the world necessarily objectively, even though in this particular instance, it's definitely necessary, right? This tiger is about to eat me. But in situations where I'm not confronted with a tiger and I'm in a fearful state, basically the whole world starts to validate my fear. Everything I see, I'm taking it in. Everything is confirming my fear bias. And importantly, there's a motivation to act embedded in the emotions. So I'm motivating to get the heck away from this tiger in this particular instance. Or if I'm overcome with anger, I'm motivated to remove the anger's being triggered by basically something emerging between me and something I want. And so the motivation there is to get rid of the threat. So the idea here is that every emotion has embedded in it a purpose, in a sense, and it's priming us to act. And that could be quite problematic if I'm not really being confronted with a tiger. If I'm sitting at home, maybe looking at social media or the news or something, or just looking out my window and seeing people walk around with masks on or what have you, and I get triggered with fear. If I'm not careful, that fear is going to overtake me, and I might not even be aware I'm in a fearful state, and then I'm sort of wearing fear goggles. So to me, it's important to have some strategies to work with these difficult emotions, because for me, they're just, it's an onslaught right now of difficult emotions. Sometimes I might have the capacity just to chill, relax, meditate, what have you, and kind of let them come and go, but often I don't. Often when I recognize I'm in the emotion, the goggles are fully on, I'm wearing them. And so I'd like to introduce several strategies for working with emotions in the context of daily life. I'll try to wrap this up in 10 minutes. I was really, when I first was trained in CCT, compassion cultivation training, they really encouraged us in the class to encourage people taking the class to engage in what they call informal practices. It's basically little micro practices that you can do in the context of daily life. And I sort of was like, oh yeah, whatever, when I first heard this. But when I started integrating these into my life, I started really discovering a lot of power in them. They're sort of, we have our mind training tradition in Tibetan Buddhism. These are like mind training light, little bitty mind training exercises we can do in life. And I find them amazingly powerful and beneficial. Particularly in this case, in this instance, and for me, it's probably the most useful instance, working with these difficult emotions that emerge. And I think we're going to be able to put a handout on the website that'll give a synopsis of some of these if you want to refer to later. And I'm going to encourage you, I'll say this now in case I forget, I'm going to encourage you between now and the next class, which is 3 weeks, to play with some of these in the context of your daily life. I think you might find them useful. And what I love about these practices is, in some ways, they tie into the Dalai Lama's vision of secular ethics, in that they're practices that anybody can do, regardless of your worldview. They can, in my experience, they can enhance my spiritual practices I'm already doing. They can be offered to people who have no interest in Buddhist practices at all. They're just wonderful little micro practices that can really enhance what we may already be doing, or they could be standalone practices that help us work with difficult emotions. And the first is a practice introduced by Kristin Neff through her self-compassion work. And it's very similar in a sense to a component of that meditation we did earlier. And she defines self-compassion as having 3 components. The first is mindfulness, which is basically awareness of suffering. And the second is common humanity, which is sort of reframing the suffering in terms of shared humanity or common humanity, which again is what we did in that meditation. And then the third is kindness, offering ourselves kindness, in this case, since it's self-compassion. And this is a wonderful practice that can be done on the spot anywhere. I use it a lot. For instance, it's kind of awkward that I like teaching as a profession because I'm highly introverted, or at least that's a story I have about myself. And so anytime I'm about to speak, I'm overcome with anxiety, what have you. Like tonight, for instance, as Harvey was introducing myself, it's like, oh my gosh, are my pants unzipped? What are these people going to think of me? That kind of thing. And it's a wonderful practice to do on the spot. I first started doing this practice actually before I started public speaking, because no matter how prepared I am, I just have this oh my gosh, I can't do this feeling. And the 3 steps of this practice are just when you notice, and for me, the suffering, I start feeling constricted and isolated. And then Jack mentioned stories. These storylines are going through my head. What are people thinking? Or I can't do this, or I'm a fraud, or whatever. And that's a message to me. All right, do some self-compassion. So the first step is just to stop. And the message, and again, there'll be a link to Kristin Neff's site. And this can be done in a minute. This is a moment of suffering. Just acknowledge that this is a moment of suffering. It's not the end of the world. It's a moment of suffering. And the second is, this suffering is part of human life. What I say sometimes, another teacher I heard say, the brain does what the brain does, or the mind does what the mind does. And she has Kristin Neff on her site has other versions of these that work. So it's basically the first step is this is a moment of suffering. Suffering is part of life. Or I might say the brain is just doing what the brain does. And the third step, she recommends putting your hands or one or both hands over your heart and then giving yourself messages of kindness. May I be happy from about to speak. May I be at ease. Just some message that resonates with you. It's a wonderful practice. It can be done in a minute, 30 seconds. And it can also morph into a longer practice. Tonglen or something like that, if you're familiar. But again, those are really the three steps we did in that compassion practice at the end. It's like acknowledge the suffering and just be with it for a minute. What is it? And I like to tell myself, drop the storyline and feel it. And the feeling is often very different than the storyline I'm telling myself. And after I feel it, what's going on? Reconceptualize it, reappraise it. What I'm feeling is not like a deficit in me, it's a human experience. It's part of human life. The brain is doing what the brain does. The body is doing what the mind is doing what it does. And right there, just that recognition just gives me some space. All right, there's nothing wrong with me. It's just like I'm a person. And may I be free of this. May I have confidence with whatever comes to mind. Another strategy, this comes from Dzogchen Ponlop's book, Emotional Rescue, which is a wonderful book. It's like straight Buddhist, and I don't think he uses a Buddhist term in the whole book, as far as I can tell, or the word Buddhism. This is sort of a down and dirty paraphrase of one of his practices, but this is something, again, that I find very easy to do in daily life. It's like, so I start noticing I'm in some sort of reactive emotional state. And again, typically I notice that through these stories I'm having, but however you notice it, it's like, all right, I need to stop. And the first step is relax. And for me, when I'm in that state, if I notice my body, I'm tense, typically, or whatever, just relax. And the second step, he calls it find the gap, which is just like, in my experience at least, just creating a little space between myself and this emotion that I was totally glommed onto or fused with, and there was no space. So I'm relaxing and finding the gap, and then labeling is the third step. And labeling is another technique which I didn't use for many years. I thought it was kind of like, oh yeah, whatever, labeling. And I started using this with emotions and started finding it very helpful. For instance, anger. Instead of just thinking of anger as this strong thing that overcomes me sometimes when I'm like maybe being snarky to my wife or whatever, started noticing like more subtle types of anger, maybe aggravation, annoyance, or what have you. So, and I love this phrase he has in his book, undo the labeling of the emotion. So he's saying the emotion itself is like labeling. So in the case of self-criticism, I'm labeling myself, you fraud, you fake, or whatever. But his phrase is undo the labeling of the emotion by labeling the emotion. So it's like we're taking the power back, sort of. We're taking the power back from the emotion and taking it back to ourselves by labeling that emotion. So it's relax, find the gap, and label. Oh, I'm angry right now. And a third strategy, or final strategy, is Tarbrock's Rain. And she has 1,000 guided meditations. It can be a full-on meditation, or it can be something on the spot, which is how I use it. And RAIN stands for recognize, allow, investigate, and nurture. And again, there'll be a link on this handout where you can access her site, and she has a ton of resources. And it's very similar in a sense. The first step, RAIN, R, is recognize. Recognize what is happening. When I'm fused, I don't recognize what is happening. I'm seeing the world through those goggles that I don't even know I'm wearing. And so I saw something on Facebook that triggered my fear, and then suddenly I'm ruminating about my kid who's 9 years old. I'm worrying about how he's going to cope as a freshman in college, having gone through this in 3rd grade. And I'm not even aware that I'm really in this place of fear. I think I'm being rational. I'm thinking about all these things. So the first step is recognize, all right, what's happening? The A is for allow. Okay, I recognize it's happening. So just similar to the gap, can I just let it be? I is investigate. So I'm going to allow this, investigate it a little more, put some awareness into it. I like to ask, this is my own thing I came up with, but sometimes I like to ask, what's this emotion trying to teach me? Or what does it want? How is it motivating me to act? How is it trying to help me? And right there, it's like, oh, that's a different relationship there. Rather than being sabotaged, it's like, all right, what do you want? You nasty emotion. That was a joke. And then the N is nurture with self-compassion. So these are several strategies, and I encourage you to plan and play with these or anything that might be similar over the next few weeks. Because if you're like me, I can't imagine not being overwhelmed with really strong emotions right now. If your eyes are open. That sounded kind of condescending. I just can't imagine not being overwhelmed with strong, difficult emotions right now in our current world circumstance. So I think I'll stop, and I would love to hear any feedback, any comments, any questions.
Again, if you'd like to speak, there's a button that on the bottom of your Zoom screen that says participants. You open that up and there should be a raise hand button, and that lets Dent and myself know that you'd like to speak. We've got Evan Stewart.
Hey, how are you?
Hi.
Thank you so much. The meditation was really great. My question is along the lines of being the type of person that does tend to avoid challenging emotions, challenging situations, and how to then bridge that gap to actually bring the compassion rather than the avoidance, especially with all the challenges we have going in our world today. If you had any thoughts about that.
Yeah, well, first of all, I put you on full screen, and that background is wild. Thank you. So the question is, in terms of emotions that emerge and or maybe trigger a strong avoidant response, how can we, instead of avoiding?
Well, I guess in my case, I have an ability to be kind of blissfully ignorant sometimes to the societal ills. And as a practitioner of meditation, I think that's actually a strength in lots of ways to have equanimity. And then other times I feel like I'm tilt over the line towards denial, of just not wanting to see the news because it's just too overwhelming. I stay up to date with what's going on, but I won't cross over that line towards the compassion. I feel in my own case a little bit with, it's just too much sometimes. Like if you have compassion for all beings, that notion is so intense and so overwhelming. I have compassion for my family, for my daughter, my immediate circle of friends, and I aspire to have compassion for all beings. And in this world, in this time when things are so volatile, it's just that sort of feels like such a fine line. And I just was wondering about your thoughts about that.
Yeah, my thoughts hearing what you just said are, and I'm trying not to be like suggestive, but just for lack of time, I would say that I would encourage any of us not to put too much pressure on ourselves to feel compassion for all beings, even though that's our goal.
Or even more beings. Right.
In terms of, I would like to say one is each of us has what we need to work with already there in front of us in terms of our own experiences. So it's not about like whether you watch the news or not. So I would just encourage you to just be with your experiences and go from there. The step is really just like, what am I feeling right now? What am I experiencing? And in what ways is this bringing me difficulty? And then just reframe that as a way of connecting with others who might be feeling something similar. And then work on the compassion expansion process by connecting your suffering or your difficulty with others who might be experiencing some similar type of difficulty, without putting too much pressure to feel it for everybody. How is that?
That makes sense. It's like Tonglen for the people that are experiencing what I'm experiencing in a way.
Yeah, and this sounds prescriptive, but I would suggest or encourage not to like discount your own emotional difficulties as not big enough or something like that. But just whatever is there for you, that's what's there for you, and work with that, and don't put any interpretation on it. Just be with it, and whatever's there that you're being with, use that as a tool for expanding out and connecting with others rather than isolating or contracting. Not that you're necessarily doing that, but just use the emotional pain, so to speak, as a tool for connecting, and then generate compassion out of that connection, both for yourself and for others that emerge out of that sense of connection. All right, well, thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you.
We have time for another comment or question or two.
Hi, is this Guilia Toti?
Julia.
Hi,
Hi, how are you?
good, thank you.
Yeah, this is more of a comment than a question, but I just wanted to say that I really appreciate two things that you said. First was the comment on being depressed versus feeling depressed, that it's not just like something that you feel temporarily, it's just like something that is pervasive. And unfortunately, I'm a bit familiar with that. But when you say that, and you then say, okay, this is the same thing that you should feel about compassion, I was like, oh, that makes total sense. So it was interesting enough a nice parallel. And then also I wanted to thank the theme of this teaching being so accepting, because I feel like sometimes, like, I've been familiar with therapists, and even though with their best intention, they have a way, I think they still have a way to make you feel like there is something wrong that you have to fix. And and then it still puts a lot of pressure on you. But this way to just say, okay, no, there is nothing wrong. You don't have to fix anything. You just have to look at it, accept it. And it's just such a different outlook, and it's good to be reminded of it sometimes.
All right, great. Well, thank you very much for your feedback and your observation.
Next up, we have Wendy.
Well, thank you. And, I was just contemplating the 3 sets of tools that you relayed at the end and trying to, think about I think the one that resonates with me the most is the first one you mentioned, with first mindfulness, then common humanity, and then kindness. I've been really had to do with a lot of, well, not a lot, a few very difficult people lately. And and the when you said that compassion is sticking with it, that is just really, that was so true. Or my experience has been that is really, really true, and if I practice those 3, mindfulness, common humanity, and kindness especially, helps, it kind of solidifies the sticking with it, for me. And yeah, I just wanted to thank you for those 3. I'll keep those in mind for sure.
Yeah, great. Thanks for the feedback. And Kristin Neff on her site has a lot of resources with those particular and little variations of the practice, and some short guided meditations and things as well that could be useful, helpful to look at. Thanks so much,
Thank
Wendy.
you. Yeah.
I almost called you Wendy's iPad because that's what it says on there.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you.
I don't know how to change that on my iPad.
All right. Well, I don't see another hand, so we're going to do a dyadic experience, as we have in other Teaching Tuesdays and other events. So in this, I'll give you brief instructions, and then Emily will pair you with someone. And I'll give the instructions, and then I'll pause for a minute and see. I'm probably overlooking something if she needs to say anything. So this particular exercise is going to be the same sort of format as we did 2 weeks ago. You're going to be paired with someone, and what time is it? It's 8:16. Let's do for 4 minutes a piece. For 4 minutes. Okay, you're in a dyad. One person is the person asking the question. One person is the person answering the question. And so for 4 minutes, the questioner just asks a very simple question. Can you please describe for me what you're feeling right now? So you just ask that question, and then the respondent responds, describing how you feel in the moment. And as the questioner, your only job is to ask that question and to be there with compassionate listening presence. There's no suggesting or follow-up questions, interpreting these sorts of things. Just simply ask the question and be there with your presence. And remember that, I love the phrase Dzogchen Pomlop uses, the gap. Just be comfortable in silence, giving enough space. And then ask the question again. Can you please describe for me what you're feeling right now? So you'll do that for 4 minutes, then you'll switch and do the identical process in reversed roles for 4 minutes. And then there'll be 4 minutes to just check in with one another how it was for you, particularly as the person describing your experience, but just talk in general how it was for you, describing your experience of feeling, describing your feeling. Any questions about that? Emily, do you have anything you need to say or anything to transition into this?
So are we doing a total of 8 minutes then?
Well, it'll be 4, 4, and 4, so it'll be 12 minutes each.
Okay.
There'll be 4 minutes of asking by each person, and then 4 minutes of just shared dialogue between the two,
All right.
discussing how it was for you.
So in about a minute, I'll start the breakout rooms. If you don't want to join, please go ahead and leave now. I'll be timing, and you will see a broadcast when it's time to change. You'll see a message that says change partners. Okay.
And in that last 4 minutes, I really encourage you not to chit chat, but to really process, how it was for you, describing your feeling state. There's all these anticipatory emotions floating around. You can sense it.
All right, here we go. All right, the rooms are closing and everyone will be back in 45 seconds.
All right, welcome back, everyone. It's so cool to watch everyone just spontaneously pop up like that. Yeah, I invite any observations about this little exercise we just did, this dyadic experience. Any comments, observations anyone would be willing to share?
We have Louise.
Well, I was just saying to the person I was partnered with at the end, this is amazingly exciting and alive. And it sort of startles me because I'm somewhat resistant to the computer and all this stuff, but this has been a huge gift. And I just so appreciate everybody's honesty and authenticity. It's very exciting to be human beings kind of in this plain, simple way that we are attempting to be as Buddhists, as being very honest and truthful and not getting into a lot of ego stuff. And we all have a lot of complex issues about being with other people and what they may think of us. And it's anyway, this is quite alive and amazing. That's what I have to say.
Yeah, thank you. You use pretty strong, heartfelt words: alive, amazing, a gift.
Yeah.
So I'm taking that as you're describing sort of the overall process of just being intimate with another person, not necessarily one particular role.
Yeah, I mean, just having these kind of very honest, kind of deep exchanges of exploring your own inner life in front of people. It's amazing. Yeah.
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 Thanks for sharing. I concur with that
Yeah.
observation. I appreciate the feedback.
Yeah. And I appreciate you a lot, Dent, the way you did that. And I have seen you at retreats, but I never saw you on this level of revealing yourself. So I really appreciate it.
Oh,
Thank
you very much,
Yeah.
Louise. Thank you. Anyone else who's willing to share? And I'll just encourage you that I believe Harvey alludes to this quite a bit, that we really learn a lot from hearing from one another. All right, I see hands. I see Stephanie waving a hand.
You hear me now?
Yes, that's the ever-present question.
Sorry, I can't use the hand because I'm co-host, so I don't have a blue hand to put up. So when we worked on this at the beginning, Jack was holding this little guy, and I mean, he's my partner. I don't think he cares that I'm sharing this about him, but everything that he was saying was, I feel joy, I feel happiness, I feel love, I feel, it was just, he was just overflowing. And then he put the dog down for the next 2 minutes and he's like, I feel tension right here, anxiety. I feel it, it's tightening, and it was just so, so I was just, and of course we're not supposed to react. I'm just saying thank you and moving on, and asking him what he was experiencing now. And it was just so amazing. And I thought about how we were talking earlier and Jack said, oh, I think of Adzam Rinpoche, or you said, think of something, or it could be a being or an object that you have compassion, that you could receive something or receive compassion from or feel compassionate. And I thought it's just so amazing, that physical example. And if we could really just strengthen that too, imagine that puppy when we start to feel that way, or the guru, or, whatever it might be. It's really quite magical and quite amazing how within 2 minutes, a person can completely change. And still, they're sitting there, that being that you're looking at. And yeah, it was, I don't know, it was amazing to me to watch that happen.
Yeah, that's very interesting. Thanks. And another takeaway I have is maybe forget Tara Brach's stuff. We should all just carry around a small dog with us, and then that's all we really need.
Right, exactly. So we'll put Rain aside and take the dog.
Exactly. Yeah, thank you very much, Stephanie.
Kristin, you're next.
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. I just want to thank everyone. I feel that what this Zoom is like a gift. And I do know Don Mountain from a long, long time ago with Absam Rinpoche coming to New York and hosting some of the Vajrakalaya in my home. And of course, I haven't maintained as strong a connection as I would like because my path has taken me in other directions. But this was so loving because being on the path, sometimes one can feel so that when you recognize your limitations, you're not as far, or you don't embody the Dharma like one should be with all the retreats one has done and with all of the empowerments and the gurus and the teachings, that I actually believe that this was an answer to my prayers, because it just allowed me to be loving to myself in this time when there is so much to face, and also the stopping of the spinning, because coming from a Western education, even the Dharma can be something like accomplishment, ambition, and you're on this treadmill. And I thank the coronavirus because it stopped me in my tracks so that I could really have deeper authenticity. And this actually, for me, I feel like the first time that I feel connected to humanity. And I would never have thought this. I just learned Zoom, all this technology. This is just a few days I've been able to open up so that people could see me, because before I had an aversion to all of this. So it shows me that my concepts and my belief that this could not be good for my meditation to be a part of this technological world. I just feel more connected than I ever have. And I really want to thank Harvey and Anne for allowing us to have this dialogue, to go deeper towards our Buddhahood, but also facing the samsaric lives and emotions that we can go through, or whatever stories we have that we still don't truly see the emptiness of, and our karma, and just helping us to go one step at a time, holding ourselves with our hearts. And I just feel like my prayers were answered. And when I saw this, I was very happy. And of course, I have been busy in the lockdown, so I did miss last week, but I just want to say how grateful I am.
Mm,
Wow.
thank you. I just want to say hi. It's been so many years. I'm so touched by
has.
what you said. I remember you sitting there
Yes.
outside waiting to see us in Rinpoche. And I, yeah, good for
Yeah.
you. I'm so glad you're here.
I'm so touched as well.
Mm.
Thank you.
Wow.
Up next is Ted.
I want to say that Paul had his hand up before me, and I'll be happy.
Oh, I'm so sorry, Ted. I unmuted you.
Can you hear me?
Yes. Yes.
I want to say that Paul
Mhm.
had his hand up before me, and I'll go after him
Mhm.
if he wants to go still.
We are discussing reactions to the practice right now. And because Paul did not do the practice, we'll save his comment for later.
Oh, okay. In the practice, I felt a kind of tearing up because my daughter is giving birth or laboring for her first child. And so I had a lot of emotion, sort of a poignancy that she's having a hard time and I'm not there. And, I can't soften, alleviate right now any pain or struggle that she's in, and support her physically. But then I realized as I felt this, that wait, Abby's strong and she has a lot of love surrounding her, a lot of support from her community. And as I thought about that, the compassion that is surrounding her and her journey to motherhood with her new daughter, I felt peace and I felt joy. And the other thing I want to say is I want to thank my partner who created a space between us where I could experience this, and where he also was freely and openly talking about what he was experiencing. And so I felt that the 8 minutes that we were back and forth together created a space between us. And I want to just honor that in between space that we created. And I thought we actually supported each other in that space, and I'm grateful for that.
All right, thank you very much for your feedback, Ted. It's very wonderful to hear both your expression of what you experienced and then your validation of this sort of space that can occur, this intimate space, even in a platform such as Zoom. Yeah, thank you so much. Now I would like to pass the baton, so to speak, to Mark for any Anything you'd like to add? Any reflections about tonight?
You're muted. You're muted, Mark.
Yeah, I think it's one of those things where Emily and I try to unlock it at the same time, and we locked it. Thank you, Emily. Yeah, I thank you for inviting me here to give some closing thoughts. I think there's two points that I'd like to follow up on. One came to mind. It started with Phyllis, who I'm not using her just because she was my partner. Thank you, Phyllis, for being my partner. She had a comment earlier on that some of this stuff isn't necessarily intuitive, saying sometimes it's hard to be in touch with, what exactly am I feeling in this moment, and trying to bridge this into, well, what does this mean in a traditional Dharma practice? How does this come to, if we're more of a mindfulness path, a compassion or a Vajrayana path? It doesn't necessarily equate right off the bat. There's not, a one-to-one equation for what we call anger or jealousy to some equivalent in a traditional, Dharma language. And I think that in part, we're all exploring what that means. And I think what's especially important is this is, regardless of, of what traditionally is offered to us, this is where we're at. This is the language and the ideas of our experience that our culture has given us, that we've been taught to some degree, and it's a language, if you even say an economy, that we can use between each other. So this is something that hopefully we can start to bring our what we understand from a Buddhist path to our own experience of our emotions, because it's something that clearly it's a way that we come to know, come to and unravel our suffering. And then if we learn how to do that, then we can use it to share with others. And if this is the language that the people around us are using to talk about their own strife and their own troubles, great, we should learn it. I believe it was Anne Harvey at some point, saying, well, even if we can't do every single practice, it's nice to at least have the aspiration to, over some lifetimes, practice everything. So, we have a bigger toolkit to bring to other people. And what a wonderful place to start with ourselves, to make it real for ourselves so that we can make it real for other people. It doesn't have to be, something that we think, oh, I should be this way. I should be compassionate. I'm going to create a product, send it out there to the world, while we're just pushing ourselves and not enjoying that flavor for ourselves. The other thought that came up very much at the end, just to reflect on the dyadic experiences that we have. This isn't a very well thought out thought. What a wonderful thing that Anne and Harvey have given us. I remember when I first heard of these and we first did these, my first takeaway was, this other person is there, and they're present. They're always there. It's a great way to help us stay in the moment because we know someone else is asking and listening. It can really help to give us a little jolt, a turbocharge on our own reflection. I wish I had better words. The feeling I've been having more recently is, part of this is also a time to practice being with someone else. We have a chance to, it's just a small time. It's a very kind of prescribed way of interacting with people, so there's some basic expectation, but we get to be present and be calm. And this is a chance for us to bring our intentions and our understanding of our Dharma lives into sharing with other people, and to practice what it's like to, you could say, give or to offer compassion, give and offer reflection. Emotions are, they're infinitely complicated internally, what they mean to us historically, in our own history, what we expect others to respond. But once it's with someone else, there's whole layers of what we think other people are feeling, how they're going to respond to us feeling. So it's a wonderful little entree into another whole level of emotions and awareness. I really was trying to think of some witty question to ask Dent to really bring him back in at the end. The only kind of meta question I genuinely had for Dent was I was curious, when you came to this dyadic question, what was your hope of where this would take people, or what people could take away from either offering the question or being asked the question? I'd just like to hear a little bit from Dent on that.
Yeah, sure. I guess in my own sort of path, I really didn't take emotions seriously till a few years ago. And it's been quite a not detour. It's added a whole different sort of feel to my path. And I feel like on some level, for all those years before, I was in some ways doing some spiritual bypassing and meditating to not feel certain things.
Mm.
And for me, the path is very much to try to feel everything without being just, and move through it, kind of. That's it. That's not 100% true, but basically to be able to feel everything and not push anything away, but also not be overcome by it. So this process of labeling and just trying to pinpoint what it is I'm feeling is just, I ask myself that question a lot, just like I'll just stop, and similar to these practices, just like, what am I feeling right now? And I've just found that simple, quote unquote, simple process incredibly deep and meaningful, but at the same time, something that I have to keep reminding myself to do, because there's this tendency to not want to feel a lot of things. And so my idea was that would be a wonderful sort of question to explore in this sort of intimate dyadic situation.
Thank you.
Well, thank you.
I'll end there.
Yeah, thanks. Harvey, would you like to say anything in closing before we go through to the dedication?
Yes, I would just like to say I'll start crying. I'm just feeling so heartened and so fruitional in terms of, I mean, I was just telling somebody recently, the first time we tried to put psychology and emotions and meditation together, and I don't know, it was the time or the audience, and got roundly kind of condemned. And I just feel, and that's probably at this point a good 30 years ago, I feel, in some ways you and Mark and many people are on parallel paths in terms of training and interest, but also we as leaders have really, and we have been growing ourselves, somewhat similar to what you just said, Dent. But I just feel so touched by seeing new people share so heartfelt way, and you teaching in such a heartfelt way, and it's really like a dream come true. Really, very touched. Thank you. Thank you all who have participated. It's really so meaningful, and I think so important for us in terms of integrating Dharma into the West, the modern West. It's really to be full human Dharma practitioners. Thank you, Dent, for giving me a few moments.
Thank you.
I just want to sort out, Emily, will it be on my computer that I'll have all of the prayers only, or would Dent have access to that? Because some of these say privately.
It's your computer only. It's
Yeah.
your account. Yeah.
So if Dent, if you want to lead the blessing, I'll read the names after it and we'll light the candle.
Are we ready to
want.
light the candle?
Sure. Do we do the sharing the merit as well, or just the blessing?
Just the blessing tonight.
Okay. You ready now?
Yeah.
With all of you in mind, we light this lamp of clarity. May the glow of love, wisdom shine within us, everyone, till we all rise forth burning, one enlightened mandala.
And so tonight we have prayers for all beings throughout space, all that are ill and all who have been afflicted with all of the difficulties of racism in our culture in every way related to all of those difficulties. And then in particular, Ken, Chris, Goodrose, and the Bardo, Connie Burrows, her mother, 3 caregivers, all COVID, Joanne Schneider, Millie Schneider, Jeremiah Wesser, and the Bardo, Catherine Wesser, Bardo, Griffin, Metcalf, Mike Bozoff, Bardo, Annie Ladon, Camachos, Monica and Mike, Lama Ann, Lama Harvey, Emily, Gary, Jessica, Kaisu, and Biden. Abby's Easy Birth for Jacqueline, Delano's Healing for Isabel, Mary Prowse and the Bardo, Millie Schneider, Rita Bellinger. Prayers for Abby and baby soon to be, Jacqueline and Richard Delano, Kimian's mom, Millie Schneider, Luke and Soleil, Christian May, that's a question, Vatana, Rosa, Elizabeth, JF and the Bardo, Julia, Josh, Era, Karen, Maria, Sylvia, Orlando, Nathaniel, Leah, Emma, Ed, protesters, BIPOC, and LBGT communities. And that is it for tonight. We will do an ah. Anne wants to make an announcement.
You're all invited to our regular Sunday meditation at 11 o'clock, led by different people, and also a very sweet guided meditation. And convene again. Dent is taking the next class in this series as well. Is that right?
Yeah.
And 2 weeks from now?
No,
3 weeks.
the first Tuesday of July.
The first Tuesday of July. And we invite you to look at we now proudly actually have events listed on our web page, which wasn't always the case. And you can look there and see what interests you. We welcome people that we haven't met before. I think there were a few tonight. Thank you for coming and some of you for speaking. Take care of yourselves. Keep in mind Dent's teaching tonight. Compassion.
Good night, everyone.
Good night. Good night.
And Emily, maybe you
See you
can
soon.
unmute people so people want to.
Yeah, we have a custom unmuting and then just